Well, I'd like to thank you, first of all, for the invitation, and thank you, Fred, for doing the coordination, and all of you for being here. Really enjoyed the lunch, so thank you for that. It was excellent chili. So I'd like to begin, and I'm so grateful for the land acknowledgement, and because I do think that that's important, because that is a sign of recognizing the importance of building relationships with Indigenous people. And so what I'm here to talk about today is the role I play on it's an offshoot of Rotary. It's a special organization. It's a national organization called Honouring Indigenous People. And so I'll get into that piece of it. But I can also talk about, and it doesn't have to be today, I'd love to come back for future presentations, to talk about some of the work that Shoal Lake 40 First Nation is doing, not only in Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, but also some of the plans that we have to develop some housing in Kenora, because that is, we know that housing is certainly at a critical level across the country, and certainly magnified in smaller cities like Kenora. And so so happy to share some information about that. I've also spent most of my career working on ending violence against Indigenous women. And so if there is an opportunity, you want to take a deeper dive or learn more about the epidemic of violence against Indigenous women in our country, why the MMIW, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls National Inquiry, concluded that there's genocide happening in our country against and targeted violence against Indigenous women. Happy to do a presentation on that to really create an opportunity to understand the vulnerabilities and, more importantly, the solutions on how we can all work together to really address the epidemic of violence for our people. But today I am here to focus on honoring Indigenous people, and I live in Winnipeg. I used to run around the Kenora streets when I was a teenager here because I had relatives that lived in Rat Portage. I used to actually work in the Woolworths, where they still had the push button cash registers. And so I have lots of fond memories. And I also worked at the MS Kenora. But after I found out that I'd actually have to cook burgers and fries, I was like, I'm the last person that should be cooking anything, even today. So you don't want me. So I think I just worked there a few days, and then that was it. But Kenora is a very special place because I have a lot of relatives. It's within the traditional territory of Treaty 3 that I'm a member of. And I also wish to acknowledge the Treaty 1 territory where I live and play. I also take a moment always to acknowledge our ancestors. I believe that they're all here joining us because they guide us in all of the work that we do. And so that's important to acknowledge them. So honoring Indigenous people, I have this PowerPoint, and I'm happy to send it to somebody to send it out to the group. And I certainly hope that there is more interest with the Rotary and how you want to play a role with Rotary, with HIP. So this starts with the land acknowledgement, and thank you for adding that and beginning our day in such a good way. This next part is about Indigenous people of Turtle Island, and these are statistics where 1.6 million, we really make up around 4% of the population in Canada. Yet we are overrepresented, as we all know, in the justice system and child welfare, and have poor education and health outcomes, and that's for a reason, which we'll get into a little bit later. There are 633 First Nation communities in Canada. 7,000 plus First Nation people served in both World War I, II, and the Korean War. About a third of our people in Canada are age 18 to 45. And in fact, our young people are the largest growing population of, 15 and up, 15 to really 30 is the largest growing population in our community. And of course, we need to acknowledge our Métis and Inuit soldiers also enlisted. So we believe in balance with nature, and resources are to be managed for community benefit. And I would say that one of the things that certainly draws me as an Indigenous person to Rotary is your test. And that was something I have been involved with Rotary in Winnipeg for many years. I don't know if you have had the pleasure of meeting David Newman, but he was the mastermind of, reeling me in to meet a lot of Rotarians and to introduce me to HIP, Honouring Indigenous People. So this next part, I won't go in too much detail, but this is Canada's history. And again, I really encourage you to read the PowerPoint. It has some really valuable information about who we are and what really led up to where we are today. And so these are some key milestones in this particular slide here. And this book here is actually a very good book, 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. But we are really the only population based on race in the entire world that is where there was federal legislation established to control us. So the Indian Act is very different from the treaties. So the Indian Act was established to create more rules. So as a First Nations person, as I stand here, I have more rules in our country than you do. There's more things you can do, and there's less things I can do as a result of the Indian Act. And so there is some work and effort to try to address the Indian Act, to replace it with something that is really meant to benefit and create some equality in our country instead of being there to suppress us. So this next one is how things have been changing. We have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the Canadian Human Rights Act, Section 67 was finally repealed. The National Indigenous History Month launched at the House of Commons, so you can see the timeline of dates. Honouring Indigenous People was launched in 2014, and I came on about 2015 when they were just starting. And then that's when the calls for action came out through the Truth and Reconciliation in 2015. And we've had numerous reports thereafter really validating how racism and systemic discrimination has really impacted Indigenous people. And one of the examples I use to explain to people in the most simplest way about this inequality is using a story between my granddaughter and I. My granddaughter is 14 years old, but she was 10 at the time, and we were playing tic-tac-toe. And so everybody familiar with the game, X's and O's, you get 3, and then you win. Well, I'm a pretty competitive cookum, which is grandmother, so I'm winning all the time, and she's losing all the time because she's 10 years old. So she's getting frustrated. She says, Cookum, I want to change the rules of the game. I get to go twice, and you get to go once. So I'm like, okay. So we play that a few times. And when we play that a few times, what happens? She always wins, and I always lose. So when we look at the Canadian system, and this is all of the systems, education, health, justice, child welfare, et cetera, that the systems are rooted first in patriarchy, But they're created to always have the haves and the have-nots, that there will always be a winner and there will always be a loser. So you can create systems so that a certain population benefits and another population doesn't benefit. So that is the situation we're in today, where the systems are stacked up against Indigenous people to thrive. And so in order to change that, just like my tic-tac-toe game with Annabelle, is that if we're going to change the rules, in order to make it more equitable, we need to change the rules of the game. And we need to change the rules so they are equitable. So that everybody wins and not just one population where there is one always wins and one always loses. That decolonizing systems is really about creating that equality within systems, so it doesn't always predict the future for Indigenous people to fail, because that's what it is today. So that's why there's such effort being made by our chiefs, by many leaders, to decolonize these systems so that they are more equitable. And so we have a number of reports, including the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, which I presented, my organization presented twice, and I presented in person on the final day. Really about solutions and the way forward if we are going to solve the violence against Indigenous women. And so these, it's well documented, well researched about the inequality of Indigenous people. So what did a group of Rotarians and a group of Indigenous people decided to do was to create a special organization called Honouring Indigenous People. And it was very important that when we looked at the infrastructure of who is a member and what we're going to work on, it was important that we co-create that together. And so this is really about the time that I was brought in 2015, where we had said our organization needs to be 50% Rotarians and 50% Indigenous people. And then we're going to take it a step further, that 50% need to be women and 50% need to be men, to ensure that we have a gender balance. And so that's a logo of Honouring Indigenous People, and we were founded in 2014. And we expanded the board in 2019 and really took a look at ourselves in 2020 about what is our role. We can't do everything. So what are we going to focus in on? And we decided to focus in on education, recognizing that Rotaries across the country, you have such reach and depth within your communities that this is the perfect place to build relationships and partnerships and create those education opportunities about who are Indigenous people. Oftentimes we hear, I want to help, but I don't know who to call, and I don't know what the protocols are. How do you approach a chief? How do you approach an elder? How do we get involved in a meaningful way without always being like the charity model of, giving money and walking away? Indigenous people are, well, of course we'll take the money, and however, it's more meaningful when we can have a relationship and solve problems together. And so it is really about, that phrase of instead of just giving fish, you're teaching somebody how to fish. And so we're really looking long term, and it starts with those relationships that are really critical. So HIP is the model that was developed to create those education opportunities throughout the Rotaries across the country. And through lunch and learns like this, through activities and events that happen outside of your Rotary meetings, and to create the we call it youth to youth. And as Fred was saying earlier, that we just came off 7 days. I was like, this is either the smartest thing I'm going to do or the dumbest thing I'm going to do, is be with 50 teenagers for 7 days. It was a remarkable experience. We brought together, because we need to really look at investing into our future by focusing in on the young people today. And so the ages of 15 to 18, 25 non-Indigenous youth with 25 Indigenous youth coming together to go through 7 days of really a cultural and spiritual experience where they're learning about Indigenous people right in community, right from the mouths and the hearts of Indigenous people, so that we are really creating a generation of leaders who are well-versed already into really important foundational principles of equality and understanding Indigenous people. And so there's some videos that will be coming out. If you go to the Honouring Indigenous People website, there's a video right front and center about Y2Y. So that's our second way that we are working at educating and really changing things for the future. So this here is just all of the board members. So the board members are across the country, and you'll see that everybody comes with a different background. There's business people, there's social service people, but everybody is a leader in their own way. And you may recognize some of the faces because they get around a lot. And this is where we have some HIP district coordinators, where I believe that there is an opportunity through your Rotary to be a member and to be involved and to be engaged with HIP if that is something that interests your group. So again, this is our vision and mission, and really at the heart of our organization are the people. But again, it's about creating those education opportunities for people to understand who are Indigenous people. We do want people to go out into communities and to meet with First Nation communities, to meet with Métis people, to meet with Inuit people, and look at ways in which that you can work together. And so we value relationships, which is critically important. And again, I would say Rotary as a collective, we share a lot of the same values about giving back to community, about how do we make our community better. We're always working towards that nurturing and making our community better. So this is the awareness and learning and why that is critically important. And that's David Newman over there. And the role that Rotary can play in educating and really making sure we're addressing some of those harmful stereotypes that exist that are totally not true, but continue to really interfere with our growth and development, because then people don't want to change systems because they want to keep the status quo. So again, this is about building relationships, and as part of educating Rotarians, we want you to go to communities, and we want you to be successful at doing it. And so there is a component of the work that we do about creating awareness on how to do that successfully. So how do you approach a chief? How do you approach an elder? What are the protocols? How do you engage? How do you get involved? We can help you with that. We can help Rotaries with that. And so the HIP district coordinators are really essential in building those bridges. So again, this is walking together. Again, this is not about Rotarians and Indigenous people, but we see each other as integrated and as one. And we want to do things together that benefit the entire community. And so that continues to be a mandate of Honouring Indigenous People. And so these are some of the resources that we offer and provide people, is how to get started, what are the next steps, and how to advance. And so some of the areas here, if you can't see from back there, is pick one call to action through the Truth and Reconciliation 94 calls for action. Review internal systems to discover barriers. Oftentimes we find that some Indigenous people can't smudge in certain places or not welcome in certain places. Partner with Indigenous people on shared community challenge. Restore Indigenous plants. Hold a community environmental cleanup initiative together. Hold joint fundraisers for common causes. And apply for city proclamations and flag raisings on Indigenous days. And so again, you can see that these are ways in which that Rotary and HIP can work together to really help broaden the relationships that already exist. Okay, and I'm just going to finish up with our Youth to Youth event, our engagement. And as I said, we just got back a couple weeks ago, survived. It was actually very good. It was rainy in Vancouver, but every year we go somewhere. We do rely on Rotaries to identify students to go. So next year we'll be in Halifax. We usually do it in March. We are looking at doing a smaller one. So Shoal Lake 40 may be planning one for this summer where we'll have, definitely not to the scale of 50 teenagers, but a smaller scale with still the youth to youth principles of youth engagement. And so we're taking youth right on the land with elders. They are participating in a whole bunch of different teachings of that territory. And so the event in Halifax will work with the local elders and the local communities, and it'll be based on their teachings and what is how they function within their territory. And so here's some more youth to youth activities. So they're it's jam-packed, full of activities every day. And so these are long, that we've had three. This was our our second year for Youth to Youth, and already the youth from the first year became the youth leaders for this year, and it's just remarkable to see how they have really taken on that leadership role and engage with youth, and because youth know what the cool things are to do, and so they're a really important part of the planning. So that concludes that part of the HIP presentation, and I do hope that this is an area where we can continue to work together on, and perhaps we can do some joint events in the community. We can bring in some more speakers. If there are certain things that you want to learn. I know that what HIP values, certainly with our board members, is that sometimes just asking the question, and sometimes people are too scared to ask because they think it's not the right question, but we want to create that safe space for people to be able to feel free to ask questions. And so just before I conclude, I would like to share with you how Shoal Lake 40 First Nation has taken on our commitment to economic reconciliation. I am a band member of Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, have been my whole life, but I've always lived off reserve. And those of you that are maybe familiar with the Shoal Lake story or experience is that 100 years ago, when the city of Winnipeg needed water, a reliable water source for the city of Winnipeg, that they had in order to do that, they expropriated 3,000 acres of land from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation without our knowledge and permission and our consultation. They built a canal which created an island. So band members, including my mother, who was born on Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, couldn't get out and couldn't get in a safe way unless the boat, or if you had a car, you had to wait till freeze up. There was a barge, but it was always broken and you never knew when it was running. And so we advocated, and in 2021 we now have what we call Freedom Road. So there is a road that now comes out of Shoal Lake and connects to the #1 highway just on the by Falcon Lake. So we have an incredible story of really rising from that experience. We have a road. We're open for business has been my theme. So the road also created an opportunity for off-reserve people like me to come home to rebuild after 100 years of isolation. I spent most of my career in Winnipeg running the largest Indigenous organization, and I thought, you know what, I've been making money for everybody else except my own community and my own relatives. So it's time to go home and finish off my career. My work life, giving back to my own community. And so one of the first things, so I just started in June of last year, so it hasn't been a year yet. And we put together a project with grade 8 students. They designed and developed and marketed Shoal Lake First Nation water bottles and Shoal Lake First Nation stickers. I have some of those too. And this is about investing into the future generation. So they created a company. They put their merchandise on Shopify, which is an online e-commerce website. We are selling these water bottles, and this QR code, when you scan it, it goes straight to the Shoal Lake 40 website that talks about the water story that I just shared with you. And that's their way to raise awareness about the Shoal Lake water story while they are making money. And so what they will use the money for is they will have a trip in June. They will also, we partnered with the Martin Family Foundation, and they will be doing going through financial literacy. So they will have some seed money of their own. Because you work hard in business, you need to see the benefits of working hard in business, and those are values we want to teach our young people. And then the rest of the money will go back into the next grade 8s to develop the next set of merchandise that we will be selling, and really to raise the awareness of the water. So if you are interested, I just happen to bring some bottles to sell. They're $20 if anybody is interested. And of course, we have a Shopify account that you can also refer to. But we just launched this March 22nd in the city of Winnipeg, because we would like every resident, institution, business to place the stickers that the water from this tap comes thanks to Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. And Red River College is our first customer, and that will be throughout the entire college, and they will sell our products in their store as well. And we made $7,000 our first day. So